Pint. Oh my goodness. Pint cracks me up. Hello, everyone. I feel like every time I run Pint, it finds something new wrong with my stuff. Um, I love Pint. I love that it's like first party Laravel. I love the JSON configuration instead of like this dense PHP finder. But a gripe of mine with Pint is that in quote unquote patch releases, the third version number, they'll add new rule sets, changes to the rule sets. So this new with parentheses, is 8.4. They should probably not run that if I'm not on 8.4, which I don't think that I am. So double gripe there, double gripe. So anyway, sorry about that. Kind of tangent. Welcome everyone. Today I'm back to live streaming on Blueprint. I think things are really. I ran Pint to kind of like. I have this whole state here of like all these things. So we need to go through these. We need to go through these and like get this added and pushed up. I'm not necessarily going to make the PR on the stream because I don't think that makes for good content. But I think there's still a couple failing tests. If I remember correctly, last time, a couple weeks ago, we were doing something where some of these, we were determining which event or which controller statements from a Livewire context need to be aware of the properties that are mounted within Livewire. They're not necessarily going to be aware of all properties. Blueprint doesn't know what you're going to add after the fact necessarily. That may again be something that's supported later. I think there's a lot that could happen with Livewire and Blueprint. But when generating a Livewire component, is what I meant to say, it should at least be aware of the mounted properties. So I want to make sure on all of these statements, basically, we went through all of them and said, okay, well, they pretty much all need to be aware with the properties that can be passed down to them. So I think we made one of these work, but we kind of need to make them all work. So leaving all of these changes aside, because I think most of them, it looks like Pint touched like every generator, which I didn't want it to do, and I didn't commit before that, so I can't nat. So anyway, leaving Pint aside, let's just run our test. I think everything passes, but maybe not. Ideally, something's broken. Nothing's broken. Okay, so what we probably need to do is write a draft file that has a simple component, and that component has a property that kind of like all of the statements use, right? I think that's what we should try to do. So I'm hearing some chittery chatty, so hopefully everybody can hear me okay. So, hey Mateus, hey Samuel, how's it going? Welcome to the stream. Thanks for joining. You guys are regulars. Appreciate that. Okay, all tests are passing. So let's make a new test, because I think the tests for this were kind of weak anyway. So let's go back. Let's go to our component generator test. There it is. And we've got this component tree provider. Livewire with properties. That's kind of just testing mount, if you will. It's not testing all of the things. So I think what I want to do here is instead now say Livewire properties, like 4 statements or something like that. Livewire properties, all statements. Well, let's be more specific. Controller statements, right? Well, no. We're a component, not a controller, so I don't want to be confusing. I think Livewire property statements. This could probably get renamed to Livewire, mount properties. So, because that's kind of what we're focusing on there, is that if you pass in properties to Livewire, it gets mounted. But anyway, we can leave this update profile. I think that's fine. I just kind of want to separate these to drive out every statement instead of make this more complex. So I think it makes all of those things. That's fine. And then what we can say is properties statements. Let's just do that for now. Okay, so what I'll do is let's take this drafts YAML. I think I could probably just copy this. Yeah, let's take this Livewire with properties, drafts YAML, yes. So let's copy that to Livewire properties, properties statements, what do we call this? It's kind of a weird name, but anyway, let's keep going. And then component properties statements will copy the same thing. So let's go into this, copy that, what do we call this? With properties, yeah, there we go. And let's borrow the same thing. And same thing, we'll call this properties. Wow, statements. I think I said this before, but if I'm like half a foot like in the stream different, my typing, my hands just push down the keyboard. I'm like one key off all day long. I need to have like a lock-in, something that I just stand and like strap my feet into. That would be, so I'm always in the same spot. Okay, if we run our test suite now, we could just focus on this one. Let's just comment these out. And let's focus on this test. We know the others run. So yeah, let's focus on this test and let's filter just, I'm not worried about these custom namespaces and stuff yet. Let's just do that. This passes because the draft file matches. We just copied them. So yes, of course that passes. We need to go now make this draft file a little denser. So let's flesh this out a little bit more. Okay, let's say that we're updating a profile and we mount a user. We mount a user, and let's just drop this dashboard URL stuff. Let's go look at the documentation and just put every single controller action in here and pass it user. And then the generated code should effectively use this arrow user instead of just user in the local context of the component, as it would in a controller action. Because in a controller action, it's assumed that that's either from a previous statement or it was passed into the parameters of the controller action. That is not the case inside of a Livewire component. So again, we need to kind of be contextually aware of these things. So let's go back to Blueprint, I think. Yes, okay, and let's go to controller statements. There's a lot of them. Let's just go up top and let's take all these. Let's take them all and let's break them up. Okay, so we'll kind of see which ones, not all of these need it, but I think we said most do. So if we, delete, let's look at delete. Okay, so delete, generates an eloquent statement for deleting a model. Blueprint uses the controller action to infer which statement to generate. For example, within a destroy controller action, Blueprint will generate a model delete statement. Otherwise, a model destroy statement will be generated. Interesting. Interesting. So this one's actually pretty complex. Within the context of a Livewire component, if you don't pass it a property, that's a tough one inside of the context of, within a destroy controller action, that makes sense. It's a resourceful controller. The assumption is it's coming in through the URL and it's implicitly model bound. So you can just call model delete to the point of the documentation. Otherwise it calls model destroy. Within the context of a Livewire component, we don't necessarily know that user, even though in our example as developers we know that user is a model, we don't know it when Blueprint is generating the code. That kind of sucks. That kind of sucks. Yeah, the controller action knows it's destroy. Yeah, I wish we would know, if somehow Blueprint knew it was a model, then we would know which statement to generate. But otherwise, you kind of just need to call like model destroy. But even with model, we don't know. Man, that's that's like a really hard one to start on. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna bring it way down here, and maybe when we get all the way down, we'll know what to do with it. So let's okay. So yes, dispatch sync media. So this dispatch is a job. So yes, this will need the same thing. So we'll dispatch profile updated. That's more of a that's more of like an event name. So let's say something like update profile, and we're going to pass it user. So this needs to get this user, not just $user. So that's a good example. Find probably doesn't make a lot of sense. If the value provided is a qualified reference, Blueprint will expand the reference to determine the model. Otherwise, Blueprint will attempt to use the controller to determine the related model. If the value provided is a qualified reference, meaning it's a model, Blueprint will expand the reference to determine the model. Find's kind of weird because find would imply that it's always like the ID that you're finding. Whatever, yeah. Let's just pass it find user. That's fine. So this thing, dispatch an event. Okay, so similar to what we did a minute ago, profile updated, and then with user, so that gets expanded. Here we would flash, what does flash look like? Post title, generates a statement to flash data to the session. Blueprint will use the value as the session key and expands the reference as the session value. Okay, so here we would say flash, we would say something like flash user ID, maybe, or name, maybe. Doesn't really matter, it's our example. But the point is this should put into the session value as the key and expands the reference. Okay, so flash should still do this arrow user arrow name as its value. So yes, that's fine. Notify, same thing, probably gets a with. So notify post author, yeah, let's just take this same thing and let's just make it be notify user with review profile, maybe, and then with user. So same thing, this should get, you know, this user all the way down. Query was the weird one. Where title, where content, order published at. Generates an eloquent query statement using key value pairs provided in the value. Where title, where content, order published at, limit 5. Keys may be any of the basic query builder methods for where clauses and ordering, for example. So see, it says where title, my assumption is it takes, what does that actually build? That's another tough one. I'm just wondering if title is automatically expanded off of, or does it just make like $ title? I don't know how query works underneath. We'll have to take a look at that. I'm gonna move this, I'm gonna punt this as well down to the bottom because that's a tough one. Let's go back. Let's keep looking here. We have redirect. Okay, so redirect post show with post. I think we could do the same thing here. We would redirect to user, maybe like a user show with user, right? And that has to be this arrow user, so that's a good one. Render, same thing, we do with, so that needs to be smart enough to do the same thing. So we'll say, now these wouldn't necessarily be in the same controller, so that's a little funky, but again, this is kind of like this is our all statements crazy controller. You wouldn't write this code, it's just for testing. So here we'll render user show with user, and I'll just say something like extra to demonstrate that it's not, you know, that's just a local variable assumption there. Okay, resource expands, generates a resource. You may prefix the plural model reference with collection or paginate to return a resource. Okay, if the resource for the reference model does not exist, Blueprint will create one using the model definition. example, resource user. Well, let's see what it does, right? All right, and then respond generates, if the value is an integer, Blueprint will generate the proper response using the value as the status code. Otherwise, the value will be used as the name of the variable to return. Respond post.show with when the template does not exist. Is this a copy from? This example seems wrong. Respond post. Generate the proper response statement. Well, let's see what it generates, right? That documentation seems wrong. So let's just do the same thing. User show with user. Again, I don't totally understand that. Generates an eloquent statement for blah blah blah. For example, a store controller action will generate model create, otherwise model save statement will be generated. Okay, so here's an example where it would be this arrow user arrow save. So I think that's good. So we'll say save user. We're not in the context of a store action. We're within a Livewire component. And again, we don't know the behavior of the Livewire component. So I think the safest thing to do here would just be to default to model save. Again, the documentation will need to be updated with these notes, like within the context of a Livewire component, you will get model save. So I think this helps because now that we've punted on delete, now that we kind of read save, we know that, again, within the context of a, Livewire component, the assumption is this is a model that you're calling it on. So you're calling delete user, and it should therefore generate, this arrow user arrow delete. It would default to this. So that helps us bring this back to life. Up here, they should generate effectively the same thing. So see what happens when you punt on something. You let the future you trust that future you will be smarter. That is one of the ultimate hacks, human hacks in programming, is trust future you is smarter. Don't try to outsmart future you, right? We could have spent the last 15 minutes on delete not really knowing what to do, but we just ran down the line with the stuff we could do, got a little momentum, and now delete's easy, right? Time is our friend. Okay, let's keep going. We're almost through all of these. Dispatch, flash, notify, query, where were we? Redirect, render, resource, respawn, save, send. Yes, we need send. Send. All right, so let's borrow send, and we'll say send. Same thing, we'll just send this review profile thing to user email with user. Well, so it should be this arrow user arrow email. We get the idea. What's store do? Generates a statement to store data to the session. Okay, so this should look very similar to flash. So let's just borrow flash, and we'll say store user. We'll change this up just a bit. We'll say store user ID, right? Oh, sorry, store. Now we have update. And then what are we doing with update? We say update post. Blueprint will infer the model reference. Or a comma-setted list of the column names to update. You may use the value of the model reference to generate a generic update statement or a comma-separated list of column names to update. I'm curious, what is it? I mean, this is the one we have to use in our example. But I'm curious what Blueprint does with that second example. I need to like elaborate on these. I think I should show the generated code in the documentation. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the chat. But I think really expanding this page now that I'm looking through it, years later, showing each one of these examples and kind of the nuance of the generated code, I think would be nice. I don't know. All right, I think validate is our last one. Yes, it is. Awesome. So similarly, generates a form request with rules based on the referenced model definition. You may use a value this one's a little tricky. Validate's the one that I think is... Validate's the one that's going to need a lot of love within Livewire. And looking at the definition here, what I mean by that is within a typical controller in Laravel, an HTTP controller, when you say validate, you automatically get a form request object where the validation rules live. That's not the case in Livewire. Livewire, there's like 6 different ways you can do validation. You can validate something inline, you can validate something through a property, you can validate something through property attributes, you can make a form object, not a form request, a form object. You can validate it with traditional rules methods in there, you can validate it with attributes in there. So again, there's already like 5 different ways you can do it. So I'm sure there's a 6th if I keep thinking about it. So the point is, this is going to take more thought. That's almost like 2 streams within itself, is to get validate to be the kind of dogmatic, conventional way you would want to validate something within a Livewire component. I think there's a lot of power there, so I want to do that. But I'm going to remove this one for now because that is probably a use case where the validate statement within the context of a Livewire component needs to just be completely different. It just generates a completely different set of code than it would within a controller action. So I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to remove this other stuff that was originally here, and what we're left with is query. Now, I don't know what query, this is another one of those statements that I kind of don't know what query does. So I'm just going to copy this, and we're just going to see what this thing generates, and we'll tweak the code from there. So let's clean up our issue there. Okay, so we have valid YAML components. We're making an update component. We're mounting user, which is assumed in our developer minds to be a eloquent model. And we're passing that model, which is a property on the component, to all of these various controller statements, which it now needs to be aware that that is a property and output the correct code. So I'm going to run this. We're going to see what code it outputs. We're going to have to do a little dump to make that work. But if we run this, we should get a failure. And of course, it's going to say, oh, I didn't generate all that other stuff. So call to undefined method, blueprint property, component prefix. So yeah, my assumption here is that one of these statements is probably attempting to look up what user is, and it just doesn't work like that. So let's dump out what code it's actually creating if it's even getting that far. So I don't think I'll fix all of these on the stream, but let's kind of dump out, see what code we're getting, and maybe just fix one like we did last time. And then I think the rest are just probably copying whatever trait or code we end up doing here. So let's go up to our component generator. Let's just spend about 10 more minutes on this. We got this output tree. We go over the components, we populate the stub. So here's probably where I would want to dump stub. Let's just see if we're even getting this far. My guess is we're probably not getting this far because body's probably exploding because of some of these things we're passing down. So let's run this again. Yeah, we're not even getting that far. So where are we really dying? We're dying at 164. Let's backtrace that a little bit. So we're going to say 164, build methods. So build methods is where we crap out. Build methods goes up to 58. So let's kind of go back. Whoops, let's go back to our code. So 50 and 39. So it looks like ultimately 39 is actually where we. So 50, oh no, 50 is here. We build body. That takes us down here to 164, which took us to what, 129? So maybe 129 is where we're, yeah, here we go. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so one of the statements is no likey on one of those statements. Okay, so my guess is output here. Okay, component prefix. Component prefix. Statement output. Let's take a look at what eloquent statement does. Okay, this is that query statement that we didn't really know what was going on. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to temporarily remove this query statement and see if we can actually generate the rest. Because again, I don't even really remember what the query statement does. So kind of like validate, I'm going to see if that's something else. Okay, so there's other things that call this. So it's not just that. So let's put it, let's put it back. I'm all over the place on my window management there. Let's put it back and let's see what can we do here. What's actually calling this? So I think what we can do here is dump statement. We know it's an eloquent statement. Let's dump the reference, maybe? Because we've built this thing up. We've built this thing up with an operation, but it might not have a reference. So let's see what the operation is. I think that'll kind of help us know which one of these statements it doesn't like. So let's dump this out and see where it explodes. Okay, find. Find was an awkward one too, you know? Like, what are you finding? You already found the user. What is this? What code does this actually generate? Find user. Let's see what the output does. Oh, a lot of things are eloquent statements. Okay, you got save, update. So find. Find. So what is it? This says find. Okay, uses qualified reference. This uses qualified reference. What does this do? String contains reference dot. Okay, so we don't use a qualified reference here. That's fine. And then we call this with a prefix controller prefix. Okay. Determine model based on the controller prefix. And then where's model used? Is it assumed that the model's always... Yeah, see, this is tough. This might be one of those, this might be another statement that actually needs like a Livewire subclass, because this makes a heavy assumption that the controller is cruddy, meaning that it's based on a model, right? It's bound to a model by its prefix name. So it's very heavily, Blueprint does that. It heavily relies on conventions. Again, you don't have to type a lot in your draft file because we can make these safe assumptions that you follow the Laravel conventions. And one of the Laravel conventions in Blueprint that it relies upon is that you're making more or less resourceful controllers, or at least a controller that's bound to a model in some way. If not, you can't run eloquent queries because you don't have a model. So that's interesting. But the point, I think that the crux here is that this is not optional. It's a string, and it goes so far as to determine the model, and then model's never like is null. It's always looking for a model. So basically what it does is it looks to see if reference is set or reference is ID, and then it makes it off the prefix. Otherwise it uses the reference, which is just the name of the thing, meaning it's, in this case, user. So for the find statement, so first of all, this doesn't work. The whole reason this doesn't work is the component does not have a prefix. There's no prefix in the component. So within the context of a Livewire, the assumption would be that the prefix is actually the thing that you're passing into it. It assumes that it's the thing you're passing into it, effectively. Or we would need to like allow this to be null, and then that kind of tells this that it's a Livewire component. That's a hard one to start on, so I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm just gonna comment out this and see if we can get farther down the road. All of these eloquent statements are going to be a problem. So save, query, update, maybe even delete. There we go. Okay, let's just see what code's here, because I think that doesn't really make for a good stream when we're just stuck in that one bit. Okay, so here's the code that's being generated. It calls update. It says update profile dispatch user. Perfect. Profile updated dispatch this arrow user. That one works great because we fixed it from our previous bit. The request session flash username user arrow name. So that, again, that needs to be this. User notify, again, that needs to be this. That needs to be this. The compact here can no longer be used. That's interesting. That's going to be a fun one, because if one of these is this, this reference, then now you have to break that out into an array instead of compact. So that's going to be fun. Okay, same thing here, this arrow user. So return user show with user. I think that was just a bad YAML. Let's go look at that. Which one was this? Return user show with user. I think that's the respond statement here. I think from the documentation that was a bad copy paste. I think what respond should really be is more like that. This is where you would just return like a raw, like you would just trust Laravel to call toArray on this response. So I think this should just say return this arrow user. I think is probably what that should do. And then same thing here, we need the this prefixes and we need the this prefixes. So I think for the most part, this is pretty good. Let's go take a look at this fire event, because it seems like we already fixed this profile updated for the fire. And basically we're just gonna copy that whole thing. So let's look at the fire statement. Okay, so here we say body self statement component properties. So what we're doing, what we decided last time was that to output we can pass in an array of available properties. And in that case, if it's in here in this case, then we prefix it. We build out the parameters and prefix it with this if it's in array properties. So yeah, we kind of bundle that down. Fair enough. So we kind of do the same thing. We kind of do the same thing with all of these. Are these? There's no interface on these. I'm just trying to think. I think to finish up the stream, and instead of writing this in all of those statements, I think what I'd like to do is figure out how I would like to abstract this so it can be shared with all of the other ones. My assumption is if we just go look at one of these other things like the dispatch statement, it has a very, very similar output, right? This build parameters. So what I'm wondering is, do we make a trait for build parameters? Do we make a trait for build parameters that just does this code, and then like up here it's some kind of like use contextual, parameters or something like that, right? And then that gives us a build parameters method, or something. It's even just like builds parameters. It doesn't have to be so fancy as contextual. The default is effectively this, but it allows an optional array, properties, empty array, and then this just gets updated. So all of these statements that build parameters accept the properties, that could be optionally passed in here and then ultimately optionally passed down into the build parameters method. But my guess is if we go and audit like where build parameters is used, maybe there's several of these. Yeah. So dispatch statement, fire statement, redirect statement, my guess is all of these look somewhat similar, if not exact. Yeah, so not every statement has it. It's only, 5 of them. But, that's 5 out of the 12. I mean, so yeah, I think that's what I'll do. Let's go look at one that's not in this list. So dispatch fire, redirect, render send. So let's go find some other statement that's, what does it do? So let's look at the flash maybe. Is there a flash statement? There's not a flash statement. It's probably a session. I think it's called a session statement. Yeah, session statement. How does session statement build stuff? Okay, yeah, so it just kind of inlines it. It knows the reference and it inlines it. I think there's probably still an opportunity for there to be something that is a little more aware of the properties, and somehow the two traits work together. So like there's builds parameters, but then there's also like uses properties, right? Uses properties isn't the best name, but the point is that there's two traits and they could work together with each other, where like the uses properties gives you a properties variable, so we don't have to pass it into output, and then other things just kind of know to check that, and then output accordingly. So I think that would be nice. So here's what I'm gonna do. We're gonna end here. I think we have our full test minus some of these that are commented out. Oh, hello, forgot to focus there. Let's change that before I get 7 texts from my wife. There we go. Things like take out the trash and clean up the diaper pail and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it is outputting, which is good, except for those eloquent statements, which are a little bit dense and very heavily dependent on being in a controller action. That's just the way Blueprint was built, right? It was built to be assumptive that, you're generating cruddy HTTP controllers. This is a brand new thing to generate Livewire components. So some of these, a handful of these, 2 or 3 of these statements are probably just going to need to be written to be their own kind of Livewire version of that class. And that's fine because, 7 or 8 of these are just adding a trait to and it works. So that's the part I'm going to focus on. I'm going to figure out what trait I want to do, and I think next week's stream, I'll review the trait that I made so all of you can see the actual code, and maybe we'll focus on a simple one, or at least maybe I'll have it built already where we also look at one of the Livewire kind of subclassed statements. Because I think some of these will probably have to do that rather than throwing like a bunch of different if statements. There's a big difference in the code of tacking on, a simple use statement and it all just kind of works, versus like throwing 6 different if statements down here and adding a bunch of properties. I think once I start going that route where this is littered with a bunch of if statements, because this is really just a very simple DTO that has like a basically 2-string method, right? I mean, it's called output, but it's effectively creating a string representation of this statement. So these are very, very simple classes. So once you start hitting it with more properties and adding a bunch of if statements to be aware of the state that it's in instead of just outputting it, that's when I probably would rather do a subclass and then use like the pillars of programming like polymorphism to just be able to say, oh, you were a use statement. Well, really in a Livewire component, I'm gonna subclass you to a Livewire query statement, and then it knows what to output. So we'll see if that's necessary. Like I said, I'm gonna do that work off stream. We'll see if that's necessary, and we'll pick up next time. So thanks everyone for joining live, and see you next week.